Hello, welcome to Please Read Your Book. I'm Carl, and on this channel I talk about books. That'd be horror, thrillers, weird fiction, and anything else I think is worth sharing. Today I've got a rundown on a great LA noir thriller. Alright, so today I'm going to talk about Jordan Harper's latest novel, Everybody Knows. But before I get into the novel and the story and why I like it, I want to talk about how I came across this book, how I came across Jordan Harper, and why I enjoy him. And there's a little bit of a story, and I think it's interesting to not only talk about books, but to also talk about the stories around books and how people find books. So a few years ago, I was working in Saudi Arabia, and it was a really difficult and lonely time in my life. I was teaching in a small college in a pretty remote town up on a mountain. Yes, there are mountains in Saudi Arabia. I didn't know that until I found this job, and when I was preparing to go work at the college, because it's a pretty long process to get a visa for Saudi Arabia. But as I was preparing, I was kind of looking at pictures of the college and the town that it was in and things like that. And I kept seeing all these hills and mountains around the college. And I just thought, well, one thing I can do there, because everybody talks about what you can't do in Saudi Arabia, but one thing I could do there is go hiking in the mountains, which is something you can't do in Thailand. We just don't have it. At the time, I was living in Bangkok. So I thought it was going to be interesting, and I thought there'd be lots of opportunities to be active and all this kind of stuff. And it was interesting, but not in that way. The winters were absolutely freezing for me. So I arrived late fall. Winter came very fast, and it was very cold for me. Like I said, at the time that I went to go work there, I was living in Bangkok, where I live now again. And before that, I was living in Vietnam. So if you're American, I'll use American and then also non-American. But for Americans, I'd be 80 degrees is cool for Thailand. When it gets below 80, we feel like, ooh, it's getting cold, I was not prepared for temperatures in the 20s, which would be almost at freezing. A normal day here is 100 degrees. It'd be about 30 to anywhere to 30 to 35 degrees. It even gets up into the 40s. That's not unusual. So there goes a motorbike. So anyways, I was not prepared for this kind of cold, dry weather. And also I was alone. I was not prepared for how alone I was going to be, So I started reading again, and I voraciously consumed these collections of short stories by writers like Rash, Frank Bill, Donald Ray Pollock, and Richard Lange. I really wanted these kind of tough guy kind of stories, but very well written, not like pulpy tough guy, but tough stories. So I think I was really longing for stories about people's lives that were worse than mine, but also written in a compelling way and in very American kind of settings, because I found myself in this very strange landscape with people and a culture that I didn't understand. So I was reading a lot on my Kindle, and so I was buying on Amazon, and this book with what seemed like a great title that just summed up my life kept popping up as a suggestion. And that title was Love and Other Wounds. Awesome title, I have to say. Awesome title. And it was written by this tough-looking guy, Jordan Harper. If you've ever seen his headshot, particularly from that time, he's kind of a tough guy. So I bought it. I thought, what the heck, I bought it, And wow, did that book speak to me. Man, it's filled with desolation, desperation. There's tales of love and loyalty and bad decisions and people who just stick with bad decisions all the way through to the end, no matter where it's going, even when they know it's going very, very badly, and it was just great. And ever since then, I've really had a special liking for Jordan Harper and his writing. I think in all of his books, not I think, I know, in all of his books, there's always this sense of menace in the world that's sort of lurking in the shadows and behind the scenes. And it also sets the stage for the lives of the characters and what's going to happen to them. It's just fantastic stuff, in my opinion. And that brings me to Everybody Knows. Well, I mean, almost. I should say how I found out about this book. So I've talked before, like I kind of fell out of reading after a while, and it was after my time in Saudi Arabia I kind of just fell out of reading. But during the pandemic, I was back in Bangkok, and I kind of got stuck here. And like a lot of people, I was kind of losing my mind. I didn't want to admit it at the time, but I was really becoming unraveled, and I was making lots of bad decisions. And I found that I was longing for escape again. And I started to read again. I started to write a little bit, and I wanted to be immersed and around books and stories and artists again. At the same time, I was on Twitter a lot because I was teaching online. And when you teach online, that's what you do. You've always got other things in the background. I always had Twitter in the background. And I came across Jordan Harper's Twitter, and I followed him. I thought, great, he's a great author. I like him. And he tweeted about his newsletter called Welcome to the Hammer Party, another awesome title with some other cultural allusions to it. If you can catch those, maybe you can drop it in the comments. And I signed up. His newsletter was infrequent, but awesome. And it really stuck with me, and I started to follow him and look into his writing a lot more again. And eventually, I learned about Everybody Knows, which just recently came out. So, again, another connection between his books and a difficult time in my life. I know it's just purely coincidence, but it's happened in my life. So, all right, so let's get to it. So now, this book, Everybody Knows. Wow. That menace that I mentioned before from his other books and from Love and Other Wounds, it's on a whole new level in this book. There is evil on every page of this book, and it's lurking everywhere in the book, and it's much more overt and very clear. And it's the worst kind of evil. It's the evil that we do to each other. The kind of evil that we do to satisfy our most basic, base desires. Lust, greed, power over other people. It's just everywhere in this book. So yeah, it's really about Hollywood. And Hollywood really is just a playground for the worst elements of America. So Jordan Harper has really, really hit the nail on the head with this one, I think. And that leads us to the story. So the novel tells the story of a black bag publicist named May. And so what that means is she does celebrity cover-ups. This is her specialty, and she does this for a very sleazy Hollywood PR firm. And that's basically all they do. So when, I think, in the opening chapter, there's a star. I can't remember her name now. I'm not going to say the name because I'll get it wrong. But May gets called to a hotel where the star is staying, and she shouldn't be staying there because it's a very clearly just a party place. And she walks in, and people are high, passed out, having sex, all this sleazy stuff. And the starlet takes off her hoodie, and her eye is swollen, her lip is split. Somebody really just cracked her. And the story is that she got on a yacht, was paid, I think, like $1 million to have sex with some sleazy dude. And he was trying to take a video of it. She grabbed the phone, threw it out, and he punches her. And the catch is she's got to be in a movie. She's got to do a shoot. So they need a story. How did this happen? This is what May does. May comes up with these stories. And she's good at it. So so there's May, and then there's her ex-boyfriend, Chris, who is an ex-cop turned sort of private investigator, enforcer for a similar firm to May's, but it's more about kind of shakedowns and security, and it's much more physical than May's. And he's like the worst kind of cop that America is just great at creating. He's vindictive and he's violent, but he does have good inside of himself. He's just sort of been led down this path of violence, and so he's chosen to try to do justice that way, and it's led him into some very dark places. So anyways, they're reunited when May's boss is murdered in what seems like a random carjacking, but what they uncover is this sort of massive Hollywood ring of drugs and sex, underage sex, teenage sex, more drugs, and just like all this like sleazy, just this whole ring of sleaze. And I mean, you get the picture here. But don't get me wrong, this is not a pulpy piece of like titillating trash. It is genuinely stomach turning, at least for me it was. So take for instance, they discover one character's fetish. It's not May or Chris, but there's a character they sort of start to investigate when they investigate the murder very early in the investigation. His fetish is that he picks up young homeless men from these like homeless camps that are all over LA. And basically he pays them, not very much money, but he'll pay them to shoot meth and then have group sex and then shoot more meth and continue, because the meth will just make you really horny. And he'll just go to push these people to the extreme, almost to the point of death. And that's what gets him off. And sometimes these people die too. So that is just like, ugh. I mean, Jesus, wow. But the worst part is that it's really not so far-fetched, And it's sort of when the guy describes what he does with these homeless men, it's just, he's very like matter of fact, like, well, society just doesn't accept it yet, blah, blah, blah. It's just like, oh my God. But it's done in like the discourse of it is the way that people talk, and it's very like the way that he tries to justify it is, it's just something that needs to be accepted in society. Terrible stuff. And it just gets worse. Like, there's producers that use their clout to groom teenage girls and teenage men for paid or even unpaid sex with other Hollywood players. And so you start to realize that a lot of these, they find all these producers, and they're not really interested in producing TV shows and movies. They're just interested in expanding this sort of like sex ring. It's just terrible. And this is where the title comes in, Everybody Knows. So, and there's like a recurring phrase that, nobody talks, but everybody whispers. So again, everybody knows. It's a nice allusion to a Leonard Cohen song too. I think it's important though to talk about that none of these acts are really described or in detail, and it's not, like I said before, it's not like a titillating sort of erotic kind of thing. It's meant to it's revolting, and that's because Harper is more concerned with showing the aftermath of all this stuff. He doesn't really tell us about it as it happens. It's always like after it's happened and it's had some horrific impact on people and on their lives. And that feeds that sense of menace that I talked about. And in this book, the menace is actually named. It's called The Beast. And May and Chris refer to like feeding the beast or be careful about the beast. And it's just, it's a perfect name for it. And the beast is just lurking throughout this whole novel. And I don't want to give away more details to it, but it's just fantastic. Jordan Harper, he does a lot more than just weave this nasty LA noir narrative together. He's a hell of a writer, all the way down to the sentence level. And that's what really drives the novel for me, is his ability to paint these pictures and set these moods with prose that is terse and punchy, but it's still vivid and very economical. There's nothing wasted in this book. I mean, he's a fantastic editor. I think he probably has a great editor alongside with him too. And I've read interviews with him too where he says like he's just constantly edits, and it really comes through in this book. There's nothing wasted in this book. You can't skip anything. You can't just sort of gloss over anything in this book, or you miss something. So, but some of the prose, I mean, just listen to some of these things. So there's a lot of talk about the traffic because it's in L.A. So this is a great line. The gods made L.A. traffic to train you not to fight back. Great stuff. And LA traffic is like quicksand. Struggling just makes you sink faster. So I live in Bangkok. The traffic here is terrible. It's worse and more ever present than traffic in any city in the U.S. and anywhere that I've ever experienced. And I immediately love those lines. And traffic is always kind of a good metaphor for a culture and what's happening also. And in the story, I mean, the traffic is a significant part of the setting. I mean, the carjacking happens in a traffic jam. The carjacking where the murder takes place that sort of like triggers the whole narrative takes place in a traffic jam. So, and it also adds to that sort of ongoing sense of dread in the story. I mean, the characters are often stuck in traffic and left to their own thoughts and their own devices, which is interesting. I think is an interesting literary device. So, also ever present, the car, the thing that LA and America just can't exist without, even more so than Hollywood. America just can't exist without a car. And Harper looks a lot at how humans interact with the car. So, you know, like the parking lot is jammed. Sorry, this is a line. The parking lot is jammed. The valets spring from car to car. They play full metal Tetris. They swerve, reverse at full speed, and never clip a bumper. That's amazing. If you've ever seen valets operate, and in particular where there's so many cars jammed in, and just that full metal Tetris, I just think that's just great. He comes up with these sort of great lines that on the surface you might think, well, it's just a throwaway line, it's just a catchy thing, but it just works so well, and it fits in so well with LA also, where things are really fabricated. Nothing is actually what it is. So to me, it works really well. But he's also really great at conveying the human condition as well. So there's a scene where the mother of the young man who committed the murder, is sort of being interrogated or questioned by Chris. And she is not having it at all. She's just not happy at all. And Chris is kind of taken aback by it. And this is what she has to say. This is one of many things. She has quite a few great lines, some good dialogue. She says, "I saw the tapes, but that man wasn't my son." Let me do it again. "I saw the tapes, but that wasn't the man my son was supposed to be. They made this mask for him and put it on him, and he wore it long enough that it grew onto his face." I think that's a great line. If you know anyone, or if you've ever gone through a period in your life where you just kind of had to become what someone else wanted you to become, that just really sums it up. That just really hits it home. So yeah, everybody knows. It's a great read on a lot of different levels. On a very surface level, plot and the narrative, it's very compelling, very moving. It's very fast-paced. You know, it's a thriller. But the subtexts are also really fascinating to think about and interpret. And to me, that's where thrillers and other genre fiction in general gets very interesting, when you sit down and think about, well, wait a minute. We have this sort of genre, but it presents us a very interesting frame or an interesting lens that we can view the world through. And it helps us sort of scope down and see maybe things at an angle that we're not used to seeing. And the writing itself, like I just said, Harper's use of language, it's very entertaining, it's very fascinating, and it's just damn good writing. Just damn good writing. So, awesome book. Highly recommended if you like thrillers, if you like noir, if you like stories about Hollywood and LA, or if you just want a damn good read. it's just fantastic. I'd highly recommend it. So that's all for this video. Once again, this is Please Read Your Book. I'm Carl, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Take care.